it's that time again. Time for episode 19. With you as always, Chucky from the forums and Jigsaw as well.
Indeed.
And a not so stellar lineup of movies this week, in my opinion, but we'll see which ones end up being good and which ones end up being not so good, if any. So.
Yeah, it's not the finest we've done, but tonight we have the musical slasher stage Fright from 2014. From the 1980s, Children of the Corn, based off a Stephen King short story. Tamara from 2005. A British movie titled Bloody New Year from 1987. And a Canadian slasher that has somewhat gained in popularity in the last maybe 6-7 years, Courtins from 1983.
We'll get things started with Stage Fright from 2014, which is a slasher movie in which a killer who's not so fond of musical theatre. The killer terrorizes a musical theatre camp as they attempt to rehearse and eventually perform a cheap imitation of Phantom of the Opera or something like that. I guess one of the first things I need to say is that I'm not really a fan of musicals in any shape or form. I find it very difficult to enjoy any musical outside of maybe Grease 1 and 2, which I think are okay movies. I don't mind watching them. I don't necessarily watch them specifically for the music, but I would say 95% or maybe more of musicals that I've ever watched I just couldn't stand. So that made it a very difficult watch in that sense. I think the thing about this movie is that the slasher aspect of it is okay, but the musical portion of the movie is just so overwhelming. You know, they're dancing around, and some of the songs are maybe a little amusing, but not enough to really, because this is a comedy horror movie, or at least that's what it's listed as. I didn't really do a whole lot of laughing during this movie, so the comedy aspect of it didn't really do much for me either. But there's earlier on there may have been a few giggles. They're singing, dancing, and prancing around. One dude's going, I'm gay, but not in that way. And,
another guy, I'm actually gay.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting there thinking, as soon as he's singing all this, I'm like, you're gay in every possible way.
Yeah, so this one I've seen before, maybe about 2 or 3 years back. I actually liked it a lot more the first time I saw it than I do now. I'm personally okay with musicals. I do think both Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of what was that? That Sweeney Todd movie. Forget the whole name. Fleet Street. I think that movie, along with Reaper the Genetic Opera from 2010, I think both of those, which are also horror musicals, I think both of them have a lot more good, catchy music in them. Because I enjoy the occasional musical, but this one only had maybe in my opinion, 2 noteworthy songs. One of them being the one you referenced, sort of like them getting back to camp. The other one being one toward the end. I think it's like A Show Must Go On or something like that, which is decently catchy. But there's really not that many other catchy things here. What does it help is that the whole slasher aspect is, in my opinion, it's really generic. I mean, there's some okay scenes, but there's very few, hey, that's actually really cool, and you should see this type scenes. And I know it's very underwhelming. I mean, it had potential, it has a nice sleek look, but seeing it again just sort of disappoints me more than anything.
I think the slasher aspect of it's okay. I mean, there's a decent stabbing death right at the beginning, but I mean, until you get to the point where they're actually putting on the play, which is an hour into the movie, I don't think there's a whole lot to really entertain slasher fans until you get to that point. And then once you do get after that first hour in and the play begins, things do start to pick up, and there's there's quite a few deaths around it, and there are also some, I guess, homages to a few horror films. Obviously Carrie with that bucket of blood, and it was paint, I think, but And clearly there was reference to Hellraiser with the pins all in the face and things like that. So, not that that really turns it around and makes it into a good movie, but, just one or two nice things that you kind of go, oh, okay,
Yeah, referencing two of the most popular horror movies doesn't really do much to endear me to it.
No. And they're kind of just random movies. I guess you kind of can partially tie in Carrie, because Carrie has its own musical out there somewhere. I don't think Hellraiser does, but that'd be very interesting if it did. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, the comedy aspect of the movie is just it's not a funny enough movie to even be considered a mediocre success in the comedy. So aside from that one song that you kind of chuckled out a bit about the guy singing about being gay or not gay, I think only one moment where I kind of really laughed is when he made the bukkake joke about the kabuki thing. Yeah.
I mean, the question is he wrong?
In a way, he was somewhat correct. They do cover their face, so yeah. I mean, I'm not I don't listen to Meatloaf, who is one of the actors in this movie, who's obviously a very popular musical artist, and he's got a song that he kind of leads in the movie, which I thought was pretty generic, didn't do anything, which is for a guy who's such a hit songwriter from decades ago, but you think his would stand out above a lot of these other people who are just nobodies.
Yeah, it's possible, and I'm only coming in because I'm actually a Meatloaf fan. I like quite a bit of his music. It's possible that he didn't have a lyrical control over his own material. And I think the song you're talking about was actually a song I actually enjoyed, so maybe it's just a different perspective, but I know I don't know how much control he had over what he was singing.
Yeah, his performance in the movie just didn't really, and not just the song, but just his performance overall, I just didn't really find anything all that great about it. And I have seen him in other movies too, so I was kind of surprised his performance was a little flat, at least until towards the end when things kind of unfold.
Out of interest, by other movies, do you mean Fight Club?
No. I've seen him in other kind of lower budget type stuff. So. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that watching this kind of reminded me, back in, 2004, 2005, they did that version of Phantom of the Opera with Gerard Butler, and like I said, I'm not a fan of musicals in any shape or form, but my wife tends to enjoy them, so we ended up seeing that movie in the theaters, and she's a fan of the original Phantom of the Opera. I don't know how much I thought this was going to be a musical, if it's just, a few songs here and there, if it was a lot of songs, but what a weird experience. I mean, I was sitting in this theater and I could see all these other people. I'm looking around while Gerard Butler's singing this song halfway through the movie, and everyone's looking kind of like captivated or sad about what he's singing. I'm looking around like, what the fuck is going on? He belts out this one line, "She will pay," and I just start laughing, and and obviously my wife started laughing because I was laughing, and then I probably got a few dirty looks, I'm not sure, but yeah, that was just
I'm guessing that some people, and I don't mean this as a negative, but some people probably in that start out for musicals.
Yeah, so I don't know, just a weird funny story about that. There is a during the end credits, the I guess killer in the movie singing this song and about thanking people having made it watch to the end, which, yes, I deserve to be thanked because it was a bit of a chore, but and he also sings about pirating movies, saying, "I hope you didn't pirate," but then he's going on about how he's going to pirate so much hardcore shit or something.
Yes.
Yeah. That was probably the best, well, not best, but at least that was a little amusing, but too bad it happens right when the movie's finished.
Yeah, and I did even have room to be personally offended because I actually did not pirate this movie this time. So
Yeah.
I think my big issue with the killer in this, and I know it's like a sort of a comedy, horror type thing, but the killer has like a bunch of like these stupid lines after each kill, and he has this like over the top like macho voice, and I don't know, it just sort of bugged me. There's like sound going on, and he's screaming, "Shut the fuck up!" It's just I don't know, like I didn't care much for even the identity of the killer once that's discovered. I mean, I feel like it could have been okay if they went a different route about it, but as the movie, actually was, I just didn't much care for the conclusion, or much of it, to be honest. But I guess on the upside, there were some somewhat cute women here.
I kept getting one of the main ones confused with Dakota. Is it Dakota Johnson, the one from the new Suspiria and 50 Shades of Grey movies?
Believe it or not, I've never seen a 50 Shades of Grey movie.
You may have. I mean, that's a movie that gets made fun of and memed and all kinds of stuff. You probably see the trailers everywhere when it was coming out, and like even through ads on Facebook or through YouTube, they might play an ad or show something here and there.
Actually, yeah, I'm looking at her face now, and she does sort of remind me of the main girl in that one.
Yeah. When I was just kind of explaining the basic plot of this movie to my wife, who also watched it, well, she watched parts of it. I mentioned that, okay, so the killer apparently doesn't like musical theater, and that's why he's killing all these people. So she's like, so basically, it's a movie in which you're the killer. Because, it pretty much describes me in musicals, so. But I guess in saying that, it's a bit silly that the killer starts singing his own songs. I mean, you hate musical theater, what the fuck are you singing for?
It's possible that musical theater made him gay.
Yeah, well, he's gay, but not in that way. Yeah, so, it's a movie I tried to watch once before. I didn't make it all the way through, and I'm not sure if that's... I'm pretty sure it's because it wasn't doing anything for me, but yeah, I finally got through it this time, and I thought the slasher aspect of it was okay, but the musical portion is just overwhelming. That's the part of the movie that really takes center stage, so to speak, and that's a part that I didn't really care for. So, while I think there are parts to this movie, especially the last half hour, where I could watch it and at least be somewhat entertained by that, I can't see myself ever wanting to watch that first hour again, so I'm just going to give this one a 5 out of 10, which may even be generous, but still a very below average score.
Yeah, like I said, when I first saw this movie, I liked it quite a bit more than I do now. I just get a very generic vibe from most aspects of this. The musical part is disappointing coming from somebody who thinks that it could be potential in a musical slasher, but this movie didn't quite have what I was looking for. And I don't know, just not much in this movie really does a whole lot for me. And to be honest, I think a lot of this is pretty much forgettable. The only reason that people are going to talk about Stage Fright in like 10 years is because, oh hey, it's that one horror musical that nobody talks about anymore. And it's just a very underwhelming movie. It's, in my opinion, disappointing and generic, and I'm just going to give this a below average rating of 6 out of 10 just because it's a slasher.
Now, obviously, a lot of horror fans would be aware of a movie called Stage Fright from the 80s, and when I don't even think I read the plot of this one before I started. When I first tried to watch it, I went into it thinking, hey, is this like a remake of that movie? But and obviously it's not. So that's what I was kind of going into the movie expecting, like a remake of that movie, and then suddenly, 5 minutes in there dancing around and talking about not being gay, and I'm like, what the fuck?
To be fair, in the first 5 minutes of Stage Fright from the 80s, there's a lot of dancing there too.
Oh yeah, but it's certainly nothing like this.
No. Yeah, I feel like this movie had a lot more potential than it actually actually executed, so it's just disappointing. luckily this next movie is not as disappointing.
Well, don't speak too soon.
Yeah, well, we will see what happens. Next up we have the 1980s and 1984, and I think it's fair to call this one sort of a classic, Children of the Corn, in which a young couple goes into a small town of Gatlin, Nebraska, and all the kids they have killed the adults, and it's sort of like a religious cult type thing, and they are pretty much going to go after this young couple and sacrifice them to their god, he who walks behind the roars. This is a adaptation of a Stephen King short story that was, I think, published in some magazine first, but then it was in his first collection of stories titled Night Shift in the late 70s. And it follows the basic plot of the short story decently well. It's the conclusion that's almost entirely different. But this is a movie I saw so many times when I was growing up. Like that opening scene with the children taking out the adults in the diner. I mean, when I was a kid watching that scene, I always thought that was like some classic cinema. And even seeing it now, I think it's a really good scene. And like that scene even in the garage, when they go after the mechanic guy. I think that's a really suspenseful scene. I think it's pretty solid. To be honest, this is a movie that I didn't expect to like as much as I have in the past, because it's been like maybe 3 or 4 years since I've seen it. But I actually think it's a pretty solid movie, only problem being some special effects issues toward the end, and the somewhat like overly 80s happy ending that may not necessarily be the same as what you might see in the short story.
Well, I guess funny story for me, not so much a ha-ha funny story, but when I first watched this probably almost 20 years ago. Yeah, I would have been in my teen years at that point. Even though I'd seen a whole lot of horror, certainly not as much as I've seen by now, 20 years later, but at that time, this was like the worst movie I'd ever seen. 20 years later, it's definitely nowhere near the worst movie I've ever seen, because now I've seen a whole lot of terrible shit. Especially during the 2000s, when anyone with a cheap camera could make a movie, put it out on DVD, and try to make money off of it, because there's a lot of terrible movies from the 2000s. So looking back at this movie now, it's certainly nowhere near as bad as I originally thought, but I still don't like it, for many different reasons. I thought the opening scene was fine. That was okay. That was, interesting and entertaining. And I mean, the plot of the movie, the plot's decent, and I guess, that's what you'd expect out of a Stephen King movie. At least the story should be okay. But I think scenes in the movie take too long. This is like a 90-minute movie, and I'm pretty sure they could have gotten through in less than an hour. They spend almost an hour just driving around and walking around looking for people. That takes up 2/3 of the movie right there.
Yeah, I suspect a lot of that might be because the original story was like only 20 pages at most, and trying to make that into an hour-and-a-half movie, maybe spread them a bit thin.
Yeah, so that's probably my biggest gripe with the movie, is just it just feels like if I was editing this thing, I would have cut down on a lot of scenes or filmed it in a different way to just, I don't know, speed it up a little bit. The acting in the movie's okay here and there, and there's some annoying kids, like, obviously the Isaac kid's a bit, he's a bit annoying.
He wasn't a kid.
Well, no, he's like 25 years old, or at least the actor is.
But I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, but in fact, the interesting thing is that he played as Chucky in a few small moments in the original Child's Play movie too, which is kind of weird. Just a weird trivia about that guy. But there's also that gingerhead fuck.
Malachi, you don't like Malachi?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, there is something there's something about him that makes me want to slap him upside the head. Well, I mean, I want to slap all these kids upside the head because what they're doing is kind of stupid, but...
I'm sorry, but you cannot mock the religious faith.
I am an outlander!
No, actually, to be honest, I always thought Malachi was a really cool character who was sort of like leading a resurgence against Isaac, and people were standing behind him. I just thought it was sort of like a little cool revolution aspect of him.
Yeah, he had some creepiness to him too when he's like stalking some of these people, but partly maybe because he's ginger as well. Man, if he was born like 15, 20 years later, he would have at school. I'd understand why he turns insane and tries to kill people, but yeah, no, I mean my biggest thing was just that the movie it just feels like it could have been cut down a lot. So while the movie's not bad, it's just it just drags on too long throughout, and I can't see myself really wanting to watch it again just to get to some of the good scenes in the movie.
Well, luckily for you, the movie has like 7 sequels, so if you like the idea, but this movie didn't do it for you, maybe number 2 through 8 might.
Yeah, maybe there's a hidden gem in there. I must admit, I have seen 1 or 2 of the sequels, but probably like 15, 20 years ago. So
yeah, as somebody who's actually sat through most of the sequels, I would recommend the 3rd movie and the 5th movie for different reasons. The 5th is probably the one that feels most like a slasher, and of course, being a fan of slashers, I think that one's pretty decent. And the 3rd movie has a really outlandish sort of plot going for it, where some kids from this city are taken to like a private Catholic school, and of course they don't really fit in with the Catholic kids, so it's so funny.
Mm.
And actually, that's one of the reasons I sort of like this. I guess like the idea of this series, the whole idea of these kids taking the Bible even more literally than the parents do. In the book it mentioned that I think they took out the entire New Testament and just following like an old style Baptist type religion, which I think is really interesting, that they see people once they reach the age of, I think it was 18 or 19, as sinners, and they just kill them. And I think it's a really interesting idea, kids taking religion to an extreme and punishing their parents for their perceived sins. I know the movie didn't necessarily touch on that, but there were a few references to the main characters not liking the religious stuff going on that they were hearing on the radio and such. So I know it's maybe a small aspect of this final production, but I think that's one of the reasons this movie sticks out with me more.
How about them effects at the end there when they're like sacrificing and stuff?
It's somewhat unfortunate. I mean, I think there's a little charm to it, to be honest, but it definitely doesn't look amazing. And then the whole ending is, a bit much. They're trying to get the horse to walk on this monster come and control them, and it didn't really blow me away, like it blew them away because it's wind. But and I guess the whole corny 80s ending, like, hey, let's take these kids and they can live with us, for a few weeks. I didn't care much for that. I actually think there's a remake to this movie from, I think, in 2009, and I actually think the remake has a better finale than this one does. But, I mean, disregarding the special effects issues and some problems with the ending, I still think the movie's decent. I agree that maybe there's like a lot of walking and driving around that doesn't necessarily lead anywhere, but to me it sort of helps with the atmosphere of, hey, this town's really a dead town and like there's literally nobody here. So I don't know, I didn't have as big as an issue with it as you may have.
And speaking of the ending, I guess when the credits start showing up, or it just says the end, it just feels really abrupt, or out of place that it just starts to show at that moment.
Yeah, I actually forgot that until seeing it, just a few days ago, and it just seems awkward to me. I think this is a movie that, and a lot of this might just be nostalgic value, because like I said, I saw this so many times on AMC when I was a kid, and same thing with the second movie. And maybe it's that leads me to my, I guess, stronger fraction of this. On IMDb, it has like a 5.7, which it's not like terrible, but it's sort of a top it reaction. I think the movie's pretty decent. There's some issues with it, but overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I'll probably give it I'm thinking like an 8.5 and round it down to an 8 out of 10. Long live Malachi. In before one.
I'm gonna give it a 5. Yeah, it just went on too long. I mean, it's got a few okay moments. Nothing that really is demanding a second viewing from me, or even to see just specific scenes in the movie. There's nothing in the movie that I think that was so good that I have to go back and watch that one scene. So even though it has its moments of, a few decent moments, it's also just a very drawn out movie to me. So yeah, that's where I stand with that one.
Out of interest, do you think this or Stage Fright is a better movie?
If I had to pick between the two, I would rather watch this.
That's all that matters. This one wins.
Anyone listening to this, like as a standalone video, just listening to Children of the Corn review, they're going to be like, what the fuck are you bringing up Stage Fright for?
I deeply apologize to any confusion.
And for anyone out there listening, he's talking about the 2014 musical, not the 80s movie.
I mean, the 80s movie, we should talk about that sometime, because that's a fantastic movie.
We'll see. Anyways, moving on to Tamara from 2005. Well, actually, before I just go into the plot of this movie, just the name Tamara. I know you pronounced it. Or how did you pronounce it?
Tamara.
Yeah. In this movie, it's called Tamara, and here in Australia, this name would typically be pronounced Tamara. So there's like 3 different ways I've heard it.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is I saw this movie 3 days ago and I already forget how it's pronounced. So.
Anyways, I'll say Tamara just because that's how they say it in the movie, but it seems weird to me. Anyways, so this character, Tamara, she's an outcast and has a crush on her teacher, and she tries to put some sort of, I guess, love spell on him through witchcraft that she's been studying. Anyways, one night a bunch of jerky teens, or at least some of them are jerky teens, some of them are kind of unwilling participants, but, they're made up of your typical high school type students, so they play a prank on her, and it leads her to believe that she's having this romantic rendezvous with her teacher, and of course things go sour, and she ends up tussling with some of these jerky teens that played the prank on her, and there's an incident which leads to her supposed death. They decide to bury her and pretend as if nothing happened, but the next day, Tamara shows up at school looking hot as fuck and, one by one exacts her revenge on these stupid teenage characters. So I originally watched this movie back when around the time it came out. I don't know exactly if it was that year or the year after, but my thoughts on the movie haven't really changed, I don't think, since then. It's very much like, I would say it's a lot like I Know What You Did Last Summer, but you essentially take out the slasher character, the fisherman, and replace him with, this hot girl, and it's got this whole witchcraft aspect to it where she kind of controls other people, but essentially it's, it's like a cheap clone of I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's a very generic horror movie in my mind, especially for its time. It's certainly, there's nothing all that special about it in terms of what happens in the movie, but at the same time, I don't particularly dislike it either. I just thought it was very average or mediocre type movie, just generic, I guess the word is. yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot to the actual movie itself. What did you think of this one?
So this is a movie that I've never seen before. It played quite often on different television stations, after it came out, and I always saw the name, but when I read the plot, I'm like, oh, hey, this does not interest me whatsoever, so I never actually watched it. And as it turns out, I actually liked it a little more than I thought I would. I'm not going to go as far as to say it's a great movie, but I was entertained. And I was sort of getting, and maybe it's just because I saw it somewhat recently, but I was getting a Carrie 2 vibe from it. An unpopular teenage girl is in a sort of bad high school situation, and then she comes back, and she's powerful. So it has sort of like the typical high school stuff you would expect. Pretty horrible characters all around. The who cut love the father. The father was a pretty sympathetic guy, but and to be fair, the teacher character, he was a decent guy too. He was trying his best, but I mean it's just a bad situation all around. And I thought there was some interesting things here. I did like the one of the earliest deaths once she came back, the media guy who cut his ears off and cut his tongue off and impaired his eyes, in front of other students. That was pretty fun. You can imagine that the school therapist had a lot of people come in the following few weeks. I think it's a decent movie. I was entertained a lot more than I thought I would be, but I don't know if it's a movie that I would watch, that many more times. I'll just say it's better than I thought it would be, and I have pretty positive views toward it. It didn't blow me away or anything, but to be honest, I was okay with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's okay, and that's it. I mean, for me, it's an average movie. I mean, the movie, and I'm sure I mentioned this in my review on the website, but it's not. I mean, it tries to be as scary as generic teen horror movie is for its time, but it's certainly not going to really scare any horror enthusiasts out there. It's not going to be one of those creepy type movies. But with that being said, I did have one fear during the movie, and that was coming in my pants every time Jenna Dewan is strutting around the screen in those skimpy skirts, and that was definitely the highlight for me.
Yeah, she was a decently attractive individual. I mean, it might be worth dying just to get some of that.
She is married to Channing Tatum, isn't she? And, with him being who he is, he's got pretty much a pick of the litter, you'd assume, so yeah. The teacher at the end, something about the way this movie ends just weird. Like, that choice that he makes at the end just seems a little too... Like, he could have put a bit more thought into what he was doing there at the end.
Well, I don't know how many other options he had, to be honest. He's trying to keep his wife safe, so he just sees, does what he thinks it takes. And
yeah, but look, I mean, this is kind of a spoiler alert, I guess. So if you don't want anything spoiled, maybe
if you haven't seen this generic 2005 horror movie, don't listen.
Yeah, but I mean, the other option I saw is, okay, just go away and be with her. I mean, that's what I would do. For good reasons.
I can imagine the wife's reaction to that after she with you.
I mean, why kill yourself? I mean, you're not going to be with your wife either way, so just, go be with this hot chick and bang her.
You would make a terrible teacher.
Yes, I do envy him.
Yeah, to be honest, I enjoyed the movie, at the time of watching it, to, a moderate degree. But it's not a movie that has many, in my opinion, memorable things in it. I mean, I did like the Halle Berry lookalike. Forget what her name is, but the one black chick. She was she had a certain attractiveness to her.
I'm not a fan of chicks with short hair usually. So
I see, that's funny because like one of my favorite actresses is Ellen Page, who happens to be a lesbian, so that shows my taste. I also have like the short-haired pixie catalog, so that's just me. Anyway, it's a random jiggy fact. So I think the movie's decent. If you watch it like maybe once or twice, you'll probably have some enjoyment from it. But I just have a hard time believing this would make anybody's like top 15 favorite 2000s horror movies. I don't think there's enough there to really warrant that. It's you can just put it in, make some popcorn, have an okay time, but it's not really much more than that. There's so many better movies from this time period, and even you compared it to I Know What You Did Last Summer. I think I Know What You Did Last Summer is actually significantly better than this one, and many of like the sort of maybe
Oh,
generic.
well, I was just comparing it in the sense that, they accidentally kill someone, they decide to bury them and swear they're not going to mention it to anyone, and then somehow, someone comes back to exact revenge. It's pretty much a clone of that, isn't it?
It is, but that reminds me of something else I wanted to bring up. After they accidentally kill her, that one guy, one football guy's like, I'm not going to lose my football scholarship because I've, accidentally called this one. She's not worth it. Talk about absolute scam. It just, I just hate people like that. And, I knew a few people in high school who had, maybe somewhat similar personalities. And that's why I compared this one to Carrie 2, because Carrie 2 had a few football jocks who were just raping women, but it was okay because they were into football. So it's a sort of generic cliche. Hey, these jocks are bad people, but I mean in this movie they sort of were, especially when they start bullying her, because she did an article about the whole performance enhancing drag thing. It's like, hey, how can you talk about this? And God, let's talk about unlikable people. So it's actually somewhat unfortunate they have more painful deaths. I mean, to be honest, it's an okay movie. I'm just gonna give this a straight average rating of a 7 out of 10.
Well, I mean, your average rating is a 7, and my average rating is kind of around a 6. So I'm giving this a 6. So I think we both had fairly similar thoughts on the movie in terms of how much we enjoyed it. It's a fairly generic movie. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just it's okay. Like you said, you can watch it. You can have an okay time with it, eat some popcorn, whatever, and then be done with it. And aside from maybe thinking of Jenna,
I like your hesitation.
But aside from thinking about her, the movie's pretty forgettable.
Yeah, actually, another small thing. Once she came into school, after she died, and I like how the others like, wait, what the hell's going on? She's like, dressed in a very revealing manner. I was reminded of there was a sort of a comedy that came out with Emma Stone, called Easy A back in 2010, and I was reminded a bit of her personality too when she was a bit more flamboyant with her sexuality and just sort of. I don't know. I really liked that first scene. Go times.
Yeah. All I can think about is, geez, if I was at that high school, I know where I'd. Oh, no, I can't. No. Okay. Well.
Okay. on that note.
Let's move on.
Indeed. Next up, we have I'm going to say a somewhat obscure movie. I've not really heard many people talk about this one. I don't know about you, but. It's a British movie titled Bloody New Year from 1987. And the gist of the movie is 5 teenagers were on a yacht and they crash into an island. And there's nobody on the island. There's like an old hotel that's decorated for New Year's celebration. But it's like in the middle of summer and it's confusing them like, hey, how come there's nobody on this island? And then strange things start happening. They start to hear voices and they see people, but then they disappear and they're not quite sure what's going on. And that pretty much goes on throughout the movie, and it's certainly interesting. This is a very strange movie in my opinion. I didn't really know much about this before I watched it, and I can't say I was disappointed, but I was certainly hoping there was going to be a bit I'm not sure, just maybe a bit better. Like I'm not sure what it's missing. Maybe besides logic, I don't know. It just something about this movie just rubbed me the wrong way. I was hoping I could like it because there's not many. I've not seen many like 80s British horror movies. So anytime I run across one, I'm also interested. But this one really just felt all over the place. It almost felt like a cheap Portuguese rip-off almost in some ways. And then it's like a demon type chick at the end that feels like Prom Night 2. And I don't know, just the movie seems like it would be a lot more fun than it actually is. I mean, and it does help that the characters are pretty interchangeable. But what did you think about this one?
Yeah. So this one was a first time watch for me. I can't even recall if I've actually ever heard of this one before, because it's got a title where there's a lot of other movies with kind of similar titles to this one, in some one way or another. But anywho's, no, I gave it a watch, and I watched it in the best possible quality in the HD presentation, and I can't look back and say the quality of the movie is something that really, played a factor into it. But yeah, I think the movie is probably the best way to describe it is that it's a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, even the opening scene, I was just like, okay, they're kind of tussling around with these bad guys at this carnival, and they smash their car through this one like haunted ride, but at the same time, after they've smashed through it, feels like they haven't smashed through the wall. So I don't know, it just didn't. Yeah, it just felt like that scene and many other scenes were just all over the place and weren't filmed entirely correctly or put together correctly. I don't know, it's just weird.
Yeah, which is actually a shame because I'm actually looking at the director right now, and I mean he did like 6, 7 movies before this one, so this being his product after like 6 other movies is a bit of a shame.
Yeah. Even though I watched it in HD, there's clearly some issues with the print of the movie, because it's still, got a lot of like film artifact type things happening, and so you can tell that this is a movie that's probably been not lost, but it's kind of been, thrown aside and kind of just left to rot. And it is a bit of a shame. Like this, I think the first hour of the movie is just pretty terrible. Whether you want to use the word dull or boring, or I mean, there's a couple of things that happen, but nothing that really grabbed my attention in the first hour. And then the last half hour really picks up, and there's stuff happening all over the place. I mean,
yeah, I was just gonna say it goes from like a 2 to like an 8 in like a matter of minutes, and it's just a bit much for me.
Yeah, like the first hour of the movie, I was thinking, Jesus Christ, this is pretty terrible. And then I think it got to a point where this one guy punches through the girl's stomach, and at that point, then things really pick up, and she turns into whatever these things are. You call them zombies or some supernatural type demons, or I don't know what you want to call them, but I think it was a little too late at that point, though, because I'm certainly not going to watch that first hour again just to see the last half hour. And the last half hour of the movie is, I still wouldn't say great, but I'd say entertaining. There's a lot of things happening all over the place. Yeah, and it's a shame. There is even a couple of 1 or 2 decent gory moments. Specifically, I think there was like an elevator scene where a guy loses his arm. That was
that was okay.
Yeah.
One scene I sort of liked, this woman walks into a house and there's like a nut with a bunch of hooks on it, and that scene wasn't particularly, it wasn't gory at all, but just the idea of, hey, you're surrounded by a nut and the hooks are embodied in your skin. I mean, I think that's sort of a painful looking scene.
Yeah, got a bit of a Hellraiser vibe, just that one specific moment where the hooks are digging into a face of it, and good idea, but yeah, it feels like the movie could have been shot much better than what it was, and a lot of these characters are pretty boring for the most part, I thought.
Like I forget which one it was. Who was like the one? The beginning's so strange. Like they save this one girl from being bullied, and then these people get angry at them and chase them. I just I didn't really get it, to be honest. I didn't see why these people were so pissed at these kids, you know. But it didn't really seem to make a difference that this one girl was new to the group, and it just seemed like almost like wasted time. Like, what was the point of it? And to be honest, you can probably say the same thing for most of the movie. And even when the movie does get more entertaining, I wouldn't necessarily call the finale satisfying by any means.
Yeah.
This movie, it might be worth experiencing once just to see what it's like. It really is a bit strange. And like I said, I don't hear that many people talking about this. And it has almost like 1,000 ratings on IMDb, so it's not like it's a super obscure movie. But I might recommend giving it just a single watch just to see what it's like. But I didn't much care for it. And despite some potential, I thought some issues with the plot and characters were definitely problematic. So I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10. The rating I is as high as it is because I did like the setting, like an island with an empty hotel. I thought it was so cool, but I didn't like much else about this aside from the occasional few second scene. So a 4 out of 10 seems fair.
Yeah, I'm also going with a 4 out of 10. The set, or not the second half, the last half hour of the movie's pretty. I wouldn't say good, but it's entertaining. However, that first hour is just so much to get through that, like, such a chore to get through. And when a movie's a chore, that's not good. There's certainly no way I'm going to spend an hour watching that first part of the movie just to watch the last part. And I guess that's, that's where I'm at with it. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on in the movie, but the characters overall are pretty dull. Aside from some of the craziness of the last half hour, there's not a whole lot going to this movie. And it's just confusing, and it's a mess. Even the better scenes in movies, even though they're entertaining, it's still a mess to the actual plot itself. So,
yeah, I don't know if there was an actual plot itself.
Yeah. On to the final movie for today's show, Curtains from 1983, which is a Canadian slasher movie. Pretty simple plots. It's got 6 young actresses who are auditioning for a movie role at this remote mansion, and they're just, being discarded one by one by this mysterious masked killer. And right at the beginning of the show, you were talking about how it's kind of gained a bit of popularity over the last, I'm not sure exactly how many years it's been, but yeah, probably 6-7 years, and that's thanks to, I think, who was it? Synapse, who released it on Blu-ray. It's a decent slasher movie. I don't think it's special enough to be compared side to side to some of the other great slasher movies out there, but it's got an interesting mask that they use for the killer, and the slasher scenes. They're fine. Story's okay. I thought it was decent.
I've seen this one maybe twice before. Much like Stage Fright, actually, I didn't like it quite as much this time around. Maybe I've just seen more movies and my view of what I like has changed, but I think it's an okay slasher. It feels a lot different than many of the others that came out, and that's somewhat intentional. I think it was supposed to be more like an adult slasher as opposed to like a teen slasher. Which is a fine concept, but I don't know if it works that well. And I know that this movie had a lot of production issues too. I think it was originally supposed to be released in like 80 or 81, and it was pushed back like a whole year, and they put new scenes in and had a new director, so it just had a bunch of problems behind the scenes. And you can sort of tell that when watching it. It does seem a bit random toward the end. Like when we get to the final girl, I actually didn't know who that was for like the first 5 minutes. I'm like, wait, is that the singer or is that like the it just because most of these women were like interchangeable to me. The only one who stood out to me was the comedian because she had somewhat unique hairstyle. and maybe like the older woman who was like a veteran actress. But I don't know, it just I wish I liked the movie as much as I did before, but seeing it again, just the charm is really there. And I like the finale, and I do like the sort of ice skating scene that seems to be one of the most talked about sequences in the movie. But otherwise, I don't know if there's that much going for this.
Yeah, that's all I had. Yeah, like I said, it's just a very decent slasher movie from the 80s, but it's not special. I guess the only other thing that I had down to mention is, and I can't remember if this tune got played throughout the movie, maybe it did, but I noticed during the end credits it's got this kind of like piano tune for the movie, and which I really enjoyed. I tend to like a lot of music in horror movies played on piano. For some reason that really does it for me. And I just like the tune at the end of this one in the credits. I can't remember if that tune got played in the movie though.
To be honest, I didn't really notice. Although that did remind me, there was a scene toward the beginning, sort of like a dream sequence where a woman drives up on the road and she finds like a doll in the middle of the road and picks it up and then gets killed. And I think that's sort of a creepy vibe dream sequence. And there are a few scenes throughout the movie that get a bit closer to what I'm looking for. I mean, when you have like a bunch of young actresses all auditioning for the same role, you would expect, I don't know, maybe just a bit more drama going on. I did like the scene with the director sort of like making fun of the comedian. I thought that it had some character behind it, but for the most part, I enjoyed aspects of the movie. It just didn't work for me as well as it used to, and to be honest, I was a bit disappointed. I mean, and it's still an okay slasher, but I can think of so many others from this time period that I would probably recommend watching before this one. I'll give this one a 6.5, so that's just a bit below average. I'll round it up to a 7. So I don't hate the movie by any means. I just think it's okay. I don't think it's really anything special, and I don't think it's like a hidden gem or anything. Though I do believe I used to think that, so I have become bitter with my old age.
Yeah, you're a grumpy old fuck. Yeah, no, I give this movie a 7. I think it's okay. I think it's decent. I have it does enough to satisfy my slasher urges, or kind of what I want to get out of an 80s slasher movie. It certainly doesn't do anything to make it a one of those movies that you just have to bring up when you talk about 80s slashers.
Yeah, and I will say the ending is a bit more, not necessarily bleak, but it's a bit more darker than some people might think. If anything, I think it does that part right. And I also really like the final scene of the movie. So I guess well done to Cotons.
Well, I guess I'll just end this show saying that you're gay, but not in that way.
And definitely in that way.